Family, let's talk about something that makes many people uncomfortable: fasting. Now, I'm not talking about skipping lunch so you can lose a little weight or cutting sugar so you can fit into that suit again. No, I'm talking about biblical fasting, the kind where you push the plate aside, deny yourself, and seek the face of God with intentional hunger. The question is, does it really work? The answer is yes, it works, but only if you understand what it is and why you're doing it. Too many folks treat fasting like a religious diet. They think if they stop eating for a day, God is automatically impressed. But fasting is not about manipulating God, it's about positioning yourself. It's about humbling your flesh so your spirit can hear more clearly. Fasting is often misunderstood as a religious ritual, a way to prove something to God, or even a formula to force His hand. But that is not its purpose. The truth is that fasting has never been about moving God. It has always been about moving us. It doesn't manipulate His will or alter His plans. Instead, it repositions our hearts, our minds, and our focus so that we can align ourselves with Him. When a person chooses to fast, they are essentially making a statement. Lord, I want you more than I want what I'm giving up. That act of surrender opens the soul to hear more clearly, to see more deeply, and to sense the leading of the Spirit with greater sensitivity. Life is full of noise. The demands of work, family responsibilities, and the constant stream of information from the world all compete for attention. In the middle of this noise, the voice of God can feel faint. Not because He isn't speaking, but because we are not tuned in. Fasting acts as a spiritual volume control. It turns down the distractions and turns up the sensitivity of our hearts. The hunger pangs in the stomach are not wasted discomfort. They are reminders to shift our dependence from the physical to the spiritual. Each craving becomes an opportunity to pray, to seek to realign. The Bible makes it clear that when people fasted with the right heart, they experienced breakthrough. When Jehoshaphat and the people of Judah faced an army far too strong for them, they proclaimed a fast and sought the Lord together. It wasn't that God suddenly became more powerful because they denied themselves food. It was that they humbled themselves to recognize they were powerless without Him. That humility opened the way for God's deliverance. This same principle applies today. When we fast, we aren't showing off spiritual willpower. We're admitting dependence. God's voice becomes clearer. His presence becomes nearer, and His power becomes more evident. Think of fasting like adjusting the lens on a camera. Without focus, the image is blurry, no matter how powerful the camera may be. Fasting brings the focus back where it belongs. It clears the fog of distraction so that we can see God's direction with clarity. Many times we pray for guidance, but we don't pause long enough or quiet ourselves deeply enough to hear the answer. Fasting creates that pause. It stills the noise so God's whisper can be heard. This positioning is also an act of warfare. The flesh does not want to surrender. It wants what it wants when it wants it. By saying a no to the flesh through fasting, the spirit rises in authority. This is not about punishing yourself, but about dethroning the appetites that try to rule over you. Every time you turn down the plate to seek God instead, you are shifting the throne of your heart back to its rightful king. Fasting works not because it changes God, but because it repositions us to receive what He has already desired to give. It works because it tunes us to His frequency, humbles us before His power, and reminds us of where our true strength lies. In that posture, the impossible becomes possible, not through manipulation, but through alignment. Fasting by itself can easily be misunderstood as an empty exercise if it is not tied to the deeper realities of prayer and obedience. Skipping meals or pushing away the plate might give the appearance of devotion, but without coupling it with genuine seeking of God, it becomes nothing more than self-imposed hunger. The essence of fasting is not simply in denying the body, it is in opening the spirit. Prayer is what turns fasting from starvation into spiritual fuel. Without prayer, fasting has no voice. Without obedience, fasting has no impact. It is not the absence of food that moves heaven. It is the presence of faith expressed through communion with God and alignment with His will. When you fast without prayer, you may go through the motions, but you will miss the mission. Food is withheld, but the heart is untouched. It becomes a physical performance rather than a spiritual posture. And when the fast ends, there is nothing lasting to show for it, because it was never about drawing near to God. It was just about enduring discomfort. In contrast, when fasting is united with prayer, every hunger pang becomes a reminder to seek God's face. Every craving becomes a call to intercede, and every weakness becomes a platform for God's strength to show up. The same is true of obedience. If a person fasts but continues in rebellion, the fasting is hollow. The prophet Isaiah confronted this very issue when he spoke of people who fasted yet quarreled, oppressed others, and lived in disobedience. God told them their fasting was meaningless because it lacked righteousness. True fasting breaks chains, lifts burdens, and draws people closer to his heart. It demands that the outward denial matches the inward submission. Without obedience, fasting is like trying to fill a jar with holes in it. The effort is wasted because the vessel cannot hold what is being poured in. Fasting without prayer and obedience is like unplugging a lamp from the wall and then wondering why there is no light. The power source is there, but the connection is missing. Prayer is the cord that plugs us into the Spirit. Obedience is the switch that allows the current to flow unhindered. When both are present, fasting illuminates our lives with clarity, conviction, and strength. When either is missing, it is reduced to a hollow ritual, a shadow of what it was meant to be. So the question is never just, am I fasting? The real question is, am I fasting with prayer and obedience? Because fasting alone is only half a story, but fasting with prayer opens the heavens, and fasting with obedience aligns our lives with the very will of God. That is when fasting works, not as an act of deprivation, but as a channel for transformation. When a person chooses to fast, they are making a bold declaration. God matters more than my cravings, more than my comfort, more than my daily routine. Fasting is not just about taking something away. It is about elevating someone above everything else. Every time the body cries out for food and you respond with prayer, you are telling God, you are more satisfying than bread. You are more essential than my next meal. And you are more life-giving than anything I could put on this plate. That kind of declaration reshapes the heart because it puts God back in the center where he belongs. We live in a world built around comfort. The moment we feel a hunger pang, we eat. The moment we get tired, we rest. The moment we feel stress, we scroll, shop, or distract ourselves. Fasting interrupts this cycle. It removes the safety nets we've built for ourselves and forces us to confront the question, is God enough? It is in those moments of discomfort that faith is proven because the flesh screams for relief while the spirit chooses dependence. In that dependence, God meets us not because we earned his presence, but because we cleared the clutter that often hides him from our view. Cravings are powerful. They can dictate decisions, shape habits, and even control destinies. But when you fast, you strip cravings of their authority. You tell your flesh that it no longer gets to rule. You choose to hunger for righteousness more than for food. That declaration is not small. It is an act of spiritual warfare. By denying the cravings of the body, you strengthen the cravings of the soul. You rewire your appetites, training your spirit to long for God above all else. The more you practice this, the more your desires are purified and aligned with his heart. Comfort is another powerful master. We build our days around routines that make us feel safe and stable. But the danger is that comfort can dull our spiritual sensitivity. Fasting shakes us out of that dullness. It unsettles our rhythm so that we don't lean on routine, but lean on God. It says, "Oh Lord, my strength is not in the ordinary pattern of life, but in you." That discomfort becomes the very space where God speaks because the usual distractions have been set aside. Even routine itself, as harmless as it may seem, can become a form of bondage if it runs our lives instead of God. Fasting disrupts that cycle. It breaks the monotony of living on autopilot and replaces it with intentionality. It declares that time, energy, and focus belong to God, not just to schedules, tasks, or habits. In that disruption, clarity emerges and priorities are reset. So when you fast, remember, it is not just an act of withholding. It is a loud proclamation that God is greater than cravings, greater than comfort, greater than the predictable rhythms of life. It is a realignment of the soul with the eternal, a shift of allegiance from the temporary to the everlasting. Every time you choose him over yourself, you are declaring with your life, nothing else matters more than God throughout Scripture. Fasting is not presented as a minor detail or an optional side note. It is shown as a powerful catalyst that shifts circumstances, changes history, and brings the supernatural into the natural. Time and time again, men and women of God turned to fasting when faced with overwhelming situations, and the results were nothing short of extraordinary. These examples remind us that fasting is not about starving the body, but about fueling the spirit. And when done with faith, it becomes a tool that heaven uses to alter the course of events. Take Esther, for instance. She was thrust into a situation that threatened not only her life, but the survival of her entire people. The decree had already gone out. Destruction was sealed. But instead of rushing into action with human wisdom, Esther called for a fast. She asked her people to eat nothing, drink nothing, and seek God with her. In that place of humility and desperation, heaven moved. Courage was born in her heart, and favor was extended before the king. The very decree of death was reversed, and an entire nation was saved. Fasting didn't just change Esther, it changed history. Consider Daniel, a man exiled in a foreign land, surrounded by pressures to compromise, yet determined to honor God. When he fasted, setting aside the king's rich foods to eat only what honored God, his clarity increased, his wisdom grew, and divine revelation flowed. Later, when he entered into a time of extended fasting and prayer, God responded with visions that unveiled events stretching across generations. Fasting became the pathway for Daniel to receive insight no human mind could uncover. His private discipline led to public impact that still speaks today. Look also at Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. Surrounded by enemies, his army too small to win the battle, he could have panicked. Instead, he proclaimed a fast for all the people. Men, women, and children united in humbling themselves before God. And what happened? God's Spirit came with a word of assurance. The battle is not yours, but God's. They went out to face the enemy not with weapons drawn, but with praise on their lips. The armies that threatened them turned on each other, and victory was handed to Judah without them lifting a sword. Fasting opened the door for God's deliverance in a way human strength never could. Even Jesus, before stepping into his public ministry, entered into a 40-day fast. The Son of God himself, preparing to face temptation, spiritual warfare, and the weight of his mission, began with fasting. It was through fasting that he defeated the enemy's attacks in the wilderness. His ministry of power, miracles, and teaching flowed from that place of consecration. If he embraced fasting as a weapon of preparation, how much more should we? These stories are not relics of the past. They are blueprints for today. They prove that fasting is not symbolic, it is strategic. It shifts atmospheres, breaks strongholds, and brings heavenly intervention into earthly struggles. The same God who responded to Esther, Daniel, Jehoshaphat, and Jesus is the God who responds now. When fasting is coupled with faith, it has the power to rewrite what seemed unchangeable and redirect the course of entire lives, families, and even nations. Fasting is often misunderstood as a way of twisting God's arm, as if going without food will somehow force him to act on our behalf. But fasting was never designed to change God. It was designed to change us. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. His will does not bend to human effort, and his nature does not shift based on our sacrifices. What fasting does is reshape us from the inside out so that we can better align with him. It removes the clutter that clouds our vision, the distractions that dull our hearing, and the appetites that try to sit on the throne of our hearts. When we fast, the first thing we encounter is ourselves. The body begins to crave what it's used to having, and suddenly our dependence on physical satisfaction is revealed. That discomfort uncovers where our security has been misplaced. Some lean on food, others on entertainment, still others on habits or routines. Fasting strips these away and forces us to face the truth. Have we been leaning on substitutes instead of God? It is not about punishing the body, but about exposing the heart. And in that exposure, change begins. This kind of change is not superficial. It is deep, transformative, and spiritual. Disciplines our appetites. It takes the power away from cravings that have quietly dictated our choices and puts authority back in the hands of the Spirit. The flesh always wants to dominate. It cries for comfort. It demands gratification. It resists surrender. But fasting silences that voice. It says to the flesh, you are not in charge. You will not run this life. In that act of self-denial, the Spirit gains strength, clarity, and authority. Think about how noise-canceling headphones work. They don't stop all sound, but they filter out the distractions so you can focus on what you want to hear. That's what fasting does. It cancels the noise of the flesh so the voice of God comes through loud and clear. God has always been speaking, but fasting sharpens our sensitivity to hear him. It is less about getting God to move and more about positioning ourselves to recognize that he already is. This transformation also shows up in our character. Fasting reveals hidden pride, selfishness, and impatience. It brings to the surface the very areas we often overlook. When the stomach growls and the irritability rises, fasting gives us the chance to choose humility, to choose patience, to choose dependence on God. Slowly but surely, it shapes us into people who reflect his heart more clearly. That changes the true power of fasting. It remakes us from the inside so that our lives better mirror the image of the one we serve. So fasting doesn't make God love us more, and it doesn't convince him to act faster. It changes the posture of our hearts. It clears our vision, disciplines our appetites, and strengthens our faith. The greatest miracle of fasting is not in what happens around us, but in what happens within us. It turns our focus from temporary things to eternal realities, reminding us that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. True fasting was never designed to be a transaction. I give this up, so God gives me that. It is not a bargaining chip we place on the table to convince heaven to act on our timeline. At its core, fasting is about relationship, not reward. It is about drawing near to the Father, not just collecting blessings from his hand. When fasting is treated as a tool to get something, it loses its power. But when it is embraced as a pathway to intimacy, it transforms everything. When a believer fasts, the ultimate goal is not the breakthrough, the healing, the provision, or the open door, though those may come. The goal is God himself. It is learning to say, Lord, even if you don't give me what I'm asking for, I want you more than the answer. I want your presence more than I want the provision. That kind of posture shifts the entire dynamic of fasting. Instead of fasting for results, we fast for relationship. And the paradox is that when we put him first, the results often follow in ways we never imagined. This perspective is echoed all throughout Scripture. When Moses went up the mountain and fasted for 40 days, his reward was not riches or power. It was the presence of God so strong that his face shone with glory. When Anna the prophetess fasted and prayed in the temple, she wasn't chasing material gain. She was longing for God's promise, and she was blessed to see the Messiah with her own eyes. These examples show us that fasting is about seeking God's heart above seeking his hand. When fasting is reduced to a way of a getting, it becomes shallow. A person might fast for money, for success, or for recognition, but even if they receive it, their soul remains empty. But when fasting is about knowing God more deeply, it fills the soul in ways nothing else can. It stirs love, sharpens focus, and deepens trust. The hunger in the stomach becomes hunger for his voice, and the weakness of the body becomes reliance on his strength. Fasting as intimacy also brings transformation. When you spend intentional time with God, setting aside distractions, your desires begin to change. Things you once thought were important fade into the background, and his priorities become your priorities. Instead of praying, God, bless what I want, you start praying, God, I want what you blessed at 10 times. That shift in the heart is one of the greatest fruits of fasting because it draws you closer to the very center of his will. So yes, fasting works, but not as a vending machine where you insert sacrifice and expect a blessing to drop out. It works as a means of drawing near to the one who satisfies the soul. It draws you closer to the heart of God. And in that closeness, you find peace, direction, strength, and joy that no earthly reward can match. The true success of fasting is not measured by what you get from it, but by how much more of him you carry when it's done.